Good morning and welcome to this webinar on training in aged and community care, which is being hosted by the Australian Skills Quality Authority and the Community Services and Health Industry Skills Council. My name is Bronwyn Griffiths and I am the Manager of Strategic Reviews at ASQA. Also joining me on the panel today is Dorothy Rao, the Manager of Training Packages with the Community Services and Health Industry Skills Council, and Susan Jackson, who led ASQA's National Strategic Review into training in aged and community care, which was finalised in late 2013. Today's webinar will provide an update on what has been achieved since the release of ASQA's National Strategic Review into training for aged and community care, including the implementation of the Standards for Registered Training Organisations 2015 and revisions to the training package. The aim of this webinar is to assist your RTO to meet its responsibilities in the delivery of training and assessment of qualifications in aged and community care. Today, we will review ASQA's National Strategic Training in Aged and Community Care, including the background, the findings, and the progress we've made on the recommendations since the findings of the review were released. Dorothy will then provide an overview of the new training package and we will discuss the strategy going forward for regulation of aged and community care training. We will finish with time for questions and answers. These sessions are interactive. You can ask the panel a question by using the chat function on your screen. The panel will try to answer the question, as many of those questions today as possible. However, if there are any questions that cannot be answered during today's session, they will be taken on notice and responses will be posted on the ASQA website as soon as possible after the session. It is not possible to respond to questions regarding individual applications today, or audits, complaints or other matters relating to particular circumstances of individual RTOs during our sessions. Presenters at today's sessions are not able to provide responses to detailed questions about whether a specific resource or strategy would be compliant with the standards. I'll now ask Susan to provide us with an overview of and some background to ASQA's strategic review.
Thanks, Bronwyn. The review started in 2000 after the 2011 Productivity Commission report, which examined how aged care and community care training and how the general provision of aged and community care was going to be managed now and for the future in this country. It is expected that there will be a fourfold increase in the Australian population of over 85-year-olds by 2050, and this is significant, not the least for the likely demand for well-trained aged and community care workers. A number of key factors were identified by the Productivity Commission, which are directly concerned with the quality of the training of the aged and community care workforce. These include the quality and variability of training provided to prepare aged and community care workers, vastly different lengths of training provided for the same qualification by different training organisations, whether there's sufficient amounts of practical on-the-job training being provided, whether trainers and assessors have current industry experience, and whether aged and community care training was being regulated effectively. Next slide. Next slide. In response to concerns reported by the Productivity Commission, ASQA undertook its first National Strategic Review in 2013. The review consulted widely with industry and established a reference committee comprising representatives from employers, unions, and the Industry Skills Council. There were roundtable discussions across Australia, and all training organisations with the Certificates 3 and 4 in aged care or home and community care were surveyed by ASQA. 279 training organisations were included in this survey. A key contributor to ASQA's review for the sector was the audits of training organisations. In total, data from 73 audits were compiled. 20 of these training organisations were randomly selected and specifically audited, and these were selected from across Australia. The review has confirmed that many of the issues raised by the Productivity Commission about the quality of aged and community care training are well-founded. The quality and quantity of training in the sector varies widely, with insufficient on-the-job or work-based training being provided. Some trainers and assessors were identified as not having current industry experience. Most training organisations offering aged care and community care training were not fully compliant at the initial audit, with 87.7% of them being found to be not compliant with at least one of the national training standards that RTOs are required to meet if they're offering training programs leading to Australian Qualifications Framework or AQF qualifications. For the 20 RTOs specifically audited across Australia for the review, only 1/5 provided a Certificate 3 program which met the AQF benchmarks of 12 months training or more. A quarter of programs were delivered in less than 200 hours. Less than 200 hours. Half of these RTOs provided less than 120 hours of work placement, and most didn't effectively communicate with employers providing work placement. Employers' concerns included that there was little information as to what training students were required to have in the workplace or what they'd already had within the classroom, and poor third-party reports which they were required to complete. 80% of these 20 RTOs had assessment tools and practices that did not meet the requirements of the standards. The main areas of non-compliance were, for example, the use of third-party reports that were not valid, a failure to provide workplace training and experience.
Thank you, Susan, for that overview of what the review found. Now we're going to move on to having a look at what the recommendations were and our actions on those since the report was released. So the first recommendation related to ongoing regulatory scrutiny by ASQA of aged and community care training providers. So since the report has been released, ASQA has continued to make the scrutiny of aged and community care providers a priority and will continue to do so into the future. It is ASQA policy that the Certificate 3 in aged care and the Certificate 3 in home and community care must be included in the audit scope of every vet audit, where these are on the provider's scope of registration for compliance audits or applications for initial, renewal and change to scope audits. Identified in ASQA's 2015 environmental scan as a product of concern, the aged and home care qualifications continue to be audited by ASQA. Now, in relation to recommendations 2 and 3, these are workshops for RTOs. So ASQA in November and December last year, 2014, hosted 31 face-to-face information sessions across Australia. In total, 4,500 people attended these sessions. The sessions coincided with the release of the new national standards. They focused on what the new national standards meant and how ASQA would regulate against them. This included a detailed session on assessment given its importance. Videos of the sessions and the PowerPoint presentations used are available from the ASQA website. Dorothy, obviously your Industry Skills Council have also hosted information sessions. Would you like to give us an overview of those as well?
Yes, we have put in considerable effort to educate all stakeholders, not just RTOs, on the benefits of the new standards and their potential impacts. We held a series of workshops across Australia during August and September 2015 in each capital city to assist stakeholders, and we had attendance predominantly from RTOs with the implementation of the new CHC and HLT training packages.
Recommendation 4 related to a recommendation to the ISC that as part of its revision of training packages that they consider specifying minimum work placement hours and which units of competency must include assessment of work performance. Dorothy, can you update us on the ISC's actions on this one?
We, as part of our review of the training packages, included in a number of qualifications a minimum of work placement hours in the core, and specifically in Certificate 3 and Certificate 4 aged care qualifications. The Certificate 3 is now called the Certificate 3 in Individual Support and Certificate 4 in Aging Support. Assessment in the workplace also specified in critical aging and home and community units, which didn't have hours related to them, but must be assessed in the workplace. And some of these units require assessment first in a simulated environment prior to assessment in the workplace.
So recommendation 5 related to the unit assist clients with medication, and ask that the Industry Council consider specifying assessor qualifications and how the unit is to be assessed to ensure consistency and validity of the assessment processes. Dorothy, this is another one for you to tell us about.
So previously, assist clients with medication unit was worded in a way that was open to interpretation by RTOs, and also the unit administer and monitor medications made no mention of the specific assessor requirements. These new medication units of competency are now more specific and require assessment to be undertaken by a registered nurse who is also a qualified vet assessor. Assessment must also be undertaken in the workplace. There is also enhanced clarity on resourcing requirements for these units.
So the next recommendation, number 6, related to including an assessment standard that explicitly includes the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence in the revised standards for the RTOs. This recommendation has been actioned with explicit reference in the 2015 standards, which were implemented in April this year, to the principles of assessment and rules of evidence. I'm sure everyone will know what they are, but Susan, can you quickly take us through them?
Yes, thanks, Bronwyn. Well, basically there are four principles of assessment and 4 rules of evidence. The standard which has been changed, clause 1.8 particularly of the new standards, requires RTOs to implement an assessment system that ensures that assessment complies with the requirements of the relevant training package or vetted accredited course and is conducted in accordance with the principles of assessment and rules of evidence. So if we move to what these are, the first principle of assessment, the first of the 4, is fairness. So this is fairness in terms of things such as providing clear information to students. And I must emphasise that there are far more examples within the standard itself. This is just one example, that clear information about what the assessment process is given to students. The second principle of assessment is flexibility. And things like, does the training organisation look to any prior learning that the student has? So if there is not RPL being generally recognised across the student's application, but is there particular parts of this unit that the student has already got experience in? So the assessment of the student should take account of that learning and hence meet the principle of assessment, which is flexibility. A very important part of the principles of assessment is the third one, which is validity. And this is where the RTO has to ensure that the tools that are being used and the methods of assessment being used actually assess all of the unit requirements. So that's the requirements of skills and of knowledge, and addresses the context of the assessments as well. When you do the validation of the standard 1.9, this is critical to look back at the validity of your assessments. The fourth principle of assessment, are the assessments reliable? Basically, this means if 2 different assessors at different times use the same tools to assess students, would they arrive at the same conclusion? Is a student reliably being assessed? Now, the rules of assessment are, in some ways, repeat. The first one is validity, and again there's 4, as I've mentioned. So, for example, if the unit of competency contains a requirement that the student demonstrates verbal communication skills in the unit, then you cannot assess that by a written test. There has to be observation of the student demonstrating that they can verbally communicate. So you must be sure that the student is competent. Otherwise, your assessment is not valid and you haven't met that rule of assessment. The second rule of assessment is sufficiency. Have you seen enough assessment of that student to ensure that you can say that that student is competent? There's no convenient number of how many assessments are needed. You have to make that decision with the context of the student group and the particular unit requirements. The third rule is authenticity. Now this is very important as well. Is the assessor sure who is actually demonstrating competence? Now particularly in an online environment where a lot of assessment might be done these days, you have to be sure that the student is the person who is the student who is enrolled in the course is the person who you are seeing demonstrate their competence. And finally, currency. Now this is an interesting one. Is the evidence that you are seeing from that student current? So particularly in the context of recognition of prior learning, you cannot be accepting outdated evidence. Evidence that in a particular industry where there's been fast-moving developments, I mean IT is obviously one, something that's quite old might not meet this rule of assessment of currency.
Thanks, Susan. That's a really useful overview.
Now, as well as what I've said, ASQA has published a range of resources to assist training organisations in meeting the requirements of this standard, including the full inclusion of the principles and rules within the standard, and the ASQA Users Guide, various other fact sheets and videos are available on our website.
Thanks, Susan. So now we get to recommendation 7, that all training packages have more explicit assessment requirements in units of competency. Dorothy, this one would be one for you to take.
So as per the 2012 standards for training packages, we developed the assessment requirements for all units of competency in the CHC Community Services Training Package and the HLT Health Training Package, which include performance evidence. So that's performance evidence relating to product and process evidence and the frequency and of volume of that evidence. Knowledge evidence and the assessment conditions, which specify whether a unit of competency can be assessed in simulation or not. Previously, the old version of the units were not split into two. Assessment requirements are a requirement of the 2012 standards for training packages and are quite prescriptive.
The next recommendation related to revising the Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment. In relation to this, the progress on this one, the Innovation and Business Skills Australia, or IBSA, is revising the Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment. ASQA has made a submission in relation to strengthening the new version of this pivotal qualification, partly based on findings and recommendations from this strategic review. ASQA's submission has recommended that the unit of competency design and develop assessment tools be included as a core unit in this qualification rather than as an elective unit. The redesigned Certificate 4 is expected to be released shortly. ASQA also contributed advice to the development of the standards. So the new standards 1.16, or the clause of the new standards, says the RTO ensures that all trainers and assessors undertake professional development in the fields of the knowledge and practice of vocational training, learning and assessment, including competency-based training and assessment. The next recommendation, recommendation 9, related to an issue for ASQA to take up, which was raising the need for more work placement opportunities for RTOs. ASQA acknowledges that this is a continuing problem for RTOs to source work placement opportunities for their learners. We are continuing to make representation to the industry bodies, encouraging them to support RTOs with work placements to improve the quality of training. The last recommendation, recommendation 10, related to the development of overall benchmarks for the volume of learning. As you would all be aware, the Department of Education and Training is developing a new approach to the training package requirements. In order to ensure VET qualifications meet industry needs, DET is undertaking a comprehensive review of training packages and accredited courses to ensure the needs of industry are met now and into the future. And they're establishing new arrangement for training product development for Australian industry. ASQA, in its submission to this process, has included references to this report and its findings. The outcomes of DET's process is expected to be released shortly. That's an overview of where collectively we've got up to with implementing the recommendation. In addition to that, the Skills Council has also undertaken a review of the training package, and new qualifications have been finalised and endorsed. Dorothy, would you give our audience some background to the review of the training packages?
Yes, thank you. In November 2012, ASQA, which is the Senior Council of Tertiary Education, Skills and Employment, endorsed a set of new standards for training packages that change the look and feel of training packages and how they are used. As part of our 2012-2015 Continuous Improvement Plan, we undertook a full review of both the CHCO 8 and the HLTO 7 training packages. This review commenced in April 2011 and is now due for completion in December this year. The focus of the review has been the assessment requirements with the intention of ensuring quality and consistency of competency outcome. Also, we have the following pre-release community services training package components on our website for you to view. These have been submitted to the Department of Education and Training for endorsement by the Australian Industry and Skills Committee. So included in those documents are the case for endorsement and quality assurance related reports, the implementation guide, skill sets, qualifications, and all of the units of competency. Once CS&HISC receives notification that the components have been endorsed, the documents will be released on the National Register, training.gov.au. All documents will remain draft until released on the National Register, and we encourage RTOs to review these in preparation for implementation. Similarly, with the health training package, we have all of the different aspects of this case for endorsement available on our website, along with the skill sets, qualifications, and units of competency. And again, once it's been endorsed by the Australian Industry Skills Committee, we will have it available on training.gov.au.
Great, thanks for that overview, Dorothy. That's really useful. So that ends our formal session of talking to you about where we're up to with the recommendations and more generally. We're now going to move into taking some questions from the audience participants and providing with some answers. Some questions have been submitted through the registration webpage, and you might have thought of other questions during the presentation, so they're the ones we'll take on now. If your question relates to a training package, I'll ask Dorothy to answer it as our expert on the panel. If it relates to regulation, I will either take that myself or ask Susan, who has got a great deal of auditor experience out in the field, to take the question. If there are questions that can't be answered by any of us today, we will take them on notice and we'll put the answers up on our website. Okay, so the first question has come in from Lois from Job Training Institute. In the new Certificate 3 in Individual Support, there are 3 qualifications that have been put into one. If a student decides to study the 3 specialisations, how do we, as the RTO, divide the placement hours between the 3? Dorothy, that's one for you.
Mm-hmm. So the Certificate 3 in Individual Support has a requirement in the core of the qualification for 120 hours of work placement. Now, this does not change irrespective of the number of specializations that are chosen. However, the qualification is designed primarily to allow for 2 specializations. Aged care and home and community care are the most common. If you do decide to do the 3rd specialization, which is disability, that will probably take you over the packaging rules of the qualification. However, our recommendation is that you do the 3rd specialization as an additional skill set to the qualification. And I guess basically in response to the question of why it is not equivalent, there have been significant changes across the units of
Sorry, Dorothy, can I just interrupt you there? I'll just go back, so that the second question that Dorothy's moved on to, just so that our audience understands where we're going with that, is a question that's come in from Cheryl from Benchmark College. So Cheryl has asked, why were the Certificate 3 age, disability and home and community care combined into one qualification? And why is it not equivalent? So Dorothy, can you continue on with your answer about equivalency there?
All right. So really, in terms of the why it's not equivalent is because there are significant changes to all of the units of competency. In addition, the assessment requirements are a new component to training packages, and they're quite prescriptive, which didn't exist in the old units of competency. In addition, there may be some similarities between the units of competency. However, we could not find 100% equivalency between the old and new units, and as a result, we had to deem all units not equivalent.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy. Okay, so the next question that's come in is from Belinda from New South Wales TAFE. And Belinda's topic that she's interested in today is graded assessment versus competency. So I'm happy to provide you with a bit of an overview of how we distinguish between those two practices. So graded assessment is rare, but we acknowledge it's becoming more common, particularly when VET qualifications may allow articulation into higher education courses. The expectation is that RTOs ensure that assessment, among other requirements, meets the requirements of the relevant training package or accredited course. This means the student must demonstrate that they have all of the required skills and knowledge described in each of the units of competency undertaken. Where an RTO wishes to provide graded results, either for the purpose of facilitating university articulation arrangements or because of demand from industry clients or regulatory agencies, the grading must be applied subsequent to the determination of competency. Competency-based assessment principles require assessment of underpinning knowledge and the application of underpinning skills measured against performance levels as described by a training package or accredited course. It is not acceptable to consider a student competent having, for example, achieved a score of, say, 80% on a theory examination where the entire exam is being used to validate that a student has demonstrated all necessary underpinning knowledge. Where graded assessment is made available to learners, the differentiation between the level of performance required to demonstrate competence and the additional performance benchmarks that are applied to graded assessments must be clearly articulated to learners in advance. Where, for example, only some assessed competence are used for the purpose of demonstrating a higher level of knowledge or skill, that is grading, than those required by the unit of competencies, these must be clearly identified to the student prior to them undertaking the assessment. Learners who choose not to participate in graded assessments who do not complete to a satisfactory level the additional assessment for grade results must not be disadvantaged. In effect, where graded assessment is applied, the determination of results should be a two-step process. Initially, a determination should be made as to whether the student has achieved competence. Assessment evidence gathered aligns to the requirements as defined in a unit of competency, then followed by an analysis of the level of performance demonstrated to determine the appropriate grade. ASQA's User's Guide to the Standard advises, if your RTO applies any form of grading to learners, ensure that this is applied only after the learner has been assessed as fully competent and is in addition to the determination of competent or otherwise. For further information, please refer to Standard 5 and conduct effective assessment in ASQA's User's Guide to the Standards. Question 3 is from Shauna from the Western Institute of Technology, and Shauna's question relates to the nominal hours for the CHC 33015 or Certificate 3 in Individual Support. Those nominal hours are not available from the purchasing guides. Can you please let me know where I can find these hours? Dorothy, could you give an overview of that?
Yep. First off, I want to say that the ISC, Community Services and Health, is not responsible for determining what the nominal hours are. These are determined by the Victorian State Training Authority, and it's called the Victorian Purchasing Guide, and it is available from their website. And as I understand it, the new purchasing guide has been released.
Thanks, Dorothy. Question 4 relates to assessor qualification, has been asked by Robin from the Sunshine Coast. Will all assessments in the workplace be required to be conducted by a Cert 4 TAE qualified assessor, or when will a third-party report be valid? I'm going to ask Susan to take this question.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Assessment of evidence and judgment about competency must be undertaken by a person who meets the specific requirements for an assessor in the Standards for Registered Training Organisations 2015. That is, from the 1st of January 2016, an RTO's training and assessment must be delivered only by persons who have TAE 40110, Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment, or a diploma or higher level qualification in adult education. In some cases, an assessor cannot directly gather all the required evidence that supports a competency judgment. In these cases, the evidence may be gathered or reported by other people. This type of evidence is categorised as supplementary evidence. Supplementary evidence is additional evidence presented to assessors to support a candidate's claim of competence. This could include reports from supervisors, colleagues and/or clients, testimonials from employers, work diaries and evidence of training.
Thanks, Susan. The next question has come from Vijaya from Reddy Health Nursing College, and Vijaya's question is: the unit of competency for collect technical data to support client healthcare plan, which the industry strongly requires for Cert 3 and Cert 4 in aged care nursing, has been left out of the selection of units for the new courses. At the ISC's National Training Packages workshops, TAFE and I raised this issue. We were advised by the ISC presenters that it is included and will be uploaded. To date, they no longer exist. Why has it been left out and when will it be uploaded? Dorothy, this one relates to your work.
Okay, thank you. So there's two parts to this question. The first part is that the CHC08 training package has not been fully transitioned to CHC. So there are a number of units that are in CHC08 which should be superseded but aren't and are still showing as current. We will update that when we transition the whole training package, the entire training package in December after the final components are endorsed. In relation to the specific query about the unit collect technical data, our subject matter expert group determined that because this unit had to be performed under the direct supervision and delegation of a health professional, that really it related to the collection of clinical data. And as a result, this unit, the content of this unit is now included in HLT HPS 001, Take Clinical Measurements. And if you refer to our mapping guide in the implementation guide, you will note that we suggest that you consider the new unit HLT HPS 001. It's not a direct replacement unit because that unit also covers the content of another unit which is similar about the clinical measurement, taking clinical measurements. And so we've combined the content into the new HLT HPS 001.
Thanks, Dorothy, for that explanation of that one. Okay, so the next question has come from Aaron from Seed Aged Care and Jennifer from Aspire to Succeed. Why has ASQA not enforced the minimum volume of learning and continues to allow providers to continue running short courses? Well, that's a good question. ASQA shares that concern about short courses, and the short duration of a high proportion of courses remains an ongoing concern for us and industry stakeholders, as it poses a significant risk to the quality of vet. ASQA is of the view that the training packages need to include explicit guidance to RTOs on this issue to ensure that they are fully aware of the requirements of the standards to implement the AQF, and ASQA's ability to regulate against those standards is strengthened. Question 7 has come from John from Career Keys. Why don't all training package writers nominate the minimum hours it would save and prevent RTOs providing courses in insufficient hours when others are trying to meet the AQF? Dorothy, can you tell us why the training packages?
Yes, because the
Don't do
training
that.
packages are silent on training. Training packages have only a requirement for assessment, and the assessment requirements are linked directly to every single unit of competency, which is why RTOs have to align to the AQF and volume of learning. And it really is about the RTO doing the analysis of the units of competency and the qualification for the specific cohort of students that they have, and determining what duration of course would be more appropriate for that particular cohort.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy. Question 7 has come in from Jacqueline from the Nursing Training Australia. When is the Diploma of Nursing coming up on TGA? Dorothy.
Very soon. We hope that the AIS, the Australian Industry and Skills Committee, will endorse the health training package on the 1st of December. And as soon as that comes through, we will commence loading it up onto TGA and should be available soon after. So basically mid-December.
Thanks, Dorothy. Okay, so question 8 came in from Kruti from All Staff Training Consul. And the question is, other than completing the qualification in the related field, what else can the trainer do to have currency in the field? Susan, would you like to give us an overview on currency?
Certainly. Look, demonstrating industry currency, it can be done in a number of ways, and training organisations in particular industry areas will have to be aware of where the developments in that particular industry are up to. Some industries, the changes are very recent, and so currency must be demonstrated in the immediate present or recent past. Other industries have relatively little change, but that's probably in the minority these days. So one of the areas we saw in the industry review of aged care, which was particularly interesting, relevant to currency, a number of trainers were also sessional aged care workers, both in private training organisations, in enterprise organisations, and within the TAFE or public sector. So sessional employment is obviously giving you currency, and probably the best form of currency really, if it's at all possible. It doesn't always lend itself to that, the arrangements within your organisation. Other ways there in our user guide, they mention, for example, participation in industry forums, reading of industry journals. Things such as that are very useful. Some industry areas also require professional development points to be achieved each year. And so if your industry does that, then obviously there could be relevant units of competency or other ways that you can demonstrate your currency.
Thanks very much, Susan. Question 7 has come in from Deb, and she has noted the comments of less than 12 months for Cert 3. However, CHC 30212 was approximately 500 nominal hours, which fitted well with the 6 months delivery. Was this considered a course that was too short? Dorothy, can you give us an answer on how that one works?
Mm-hmm. So again, the nominal hours are a purchasing mechanism for state training authorities, and not really about the full duration for a qualification. So if you have delivered the 30212 in 500 nominal hours, you should just make sure that the 500 nominal hours hasn't meant that you haven't fulfilled the outcome requirements of the qualification, which is why it's important to note that the nominal hours are a purchasing mechanism, whereas training has to be based on the outcomes required of the units in the qualification. So if I guess as an ISC, we don't have an opinion on the duration of a course. We would just recommend that RTOs look at the nominal hours and make sure that they're not, meeting, or should ensure that they are meeting the requirements of the qualification.
Thanks, Dorothy. Question 8 has come in from Ray from Australasian College of Care, Leadership and Management. And Ray has asked, can a registered nurse in the workplace assess competency on behalf of the RTO when in placement? Susan, do you want to give us a sense of that?
Sure, and this one came up in the review as well actually. A very ideal situation was where an enterprise training organisation had an aged care facility attached to it, and some of the registered nurses had become nurse educators, which included that they were trained assessors. So if the registered nurse also has assessor qualifications, then yes, the registered nurse can complete assessments on behalf of the training organisation. Otherwise, if the RTO assessor could accompany the registered nurse in the workplace and work as a team, and that has been a long-standing ability to do that, have team assessment, and that's been in the training packages and in the standards for many years. If this doesn't apply, if the registered nurse is on their own and hasn't worked with a workplace assessor, then their evidence has to be classified as supplementary and is not direct evidence.
Thanks, Susan. The next question, question 9, has come in from Anne from AMC Training and Consult. Anne's asking about competency, making the point that competency training involves lifelong learning and transferability of skill, and has gone on to ask, if there is a mandatory volume of learning applied to all people, doesn't this negate the ability of an RTO to assess student needs and apply competence when it has been achieved? Susan, do you want to talk us through how that works?
Certainly. This is not a problem. They are not conflicting statements at all. The volume of learning that's benchmarked, which applies to all courses, it depends on the target group. There is actually a document within the Australian Qualifications Framework which says that it's called the Volume of Learning Explained. It says that their shorter time frame can apply where the target group has experience. Some words to that effect. I'm not quoting directly from the document. So in other words, if you end up with a student cohort, or you advertise to an experienced group of people who have perhaps not got the formal qualification yet and they're applying to you to do it, then the short time frame can apply. There is a requirement though that the training organisation have a rationale for this, for providing the shorter time frame, and they should certainly retain that so that if questioned about their training and assessment strategy, they can say, well, this training assessment strategy was for this number of hours, and here is my rationale for providing this in fewer hours than the benchmark.
Thanks, Susan. So we've got a few more questions coming in from today's session, so I'm just going to take some of those to continue on. We've got another one from Lois, so I take it it's our previous Lois that asked the previous question, so thanks Lois for joining us again today. Dorothy, Lois has asked, what has happened to the Diploma of Disability?
Mm-hmm. So when we were doing the review of the aged care, home and community care and disability qualifications, it became quite clear to us that the Diploma of Disability did not include any higher order skills that were disability specific. The qualification was more around or similar in content to the community services management qualification. And as such, we decided to remove that qualification from the training package. That qualification is only being used in one jurisdiction across Australia, and it's not being used for disability support work. It's being used as a management qualification.
Thanks, Dorothy. We've got a few technical questions here, which I'm just scrolling through, so please bear with me. I just want to make sure we can answer those. Okay, so the next one that we could probably take is from Dorothy. From Dorothy, and I think it's a for Dorothy as well. It's about, so it's a Dorothy to Dorothy question, and it's not a Dorothy Dixer. We didn't know about it beforehand. If an RTO delivers the dual specialisation of ageing and home and community care in the new Certificate 3, would it be sufficient to have 2 work placements used within the mandated 120 hours, one in residential care and one in community. Could the ratio of these hours per specialisation be validated by industry?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Oh, there you go.
The expectation is that the work placement, the 120 hours, is across both those industry sectors. And really, we don't specify what the ratio of that should be. It's great that you would validate that with industry.
Okay, thanks for that, Dorothy. Okay, so let's see if we can take this one now. This is to do with the requirements for trainers to hold qualifications that they deliver. Susan, is this one for you? Can I read you the question?
Yes,
The
please.
question is, and it's come in from Liz, and she's from a manager at Community Services and Health, and she's asked, what are the requirements for trainers to hold qualifications they deliver or its equivalent? For example, if the trainer does not hold the Certificate 3 in individual support but holds a higher qual, for example as a registered nurse, and has previous experience in the sector.
I'm going to speak off the cuff on this one because I haven't read the policy on this recently. But from a common sense perspective, and please don't hold me to this, if you don't have the current qualification, for example, the Certificate 3 in individual support, but you do have equivalence through your higher qualification, then you would have to do a mapping, or your training organisation would have to assist you to do a mapping of that higher experience to the units within the qualification. You can't just assume that this is the case. This has been a common issue. For example, I hold a teaching qualification, but it was teaching children, so that wouldn't qualify me to be a trainer within the vet sector. And I think, unless Dorothy has anything to add, that would be what I'd say. You must do a mapping to ensure that the units and their outcomes are covered in your credentials.
I really would like to add something to that. Units of competency, lower level unit, there isn't something such as a low level unit and a higher level unit of competency. So competencies aren't embedded at levels. So to show equivalency, you must demonstrate your expertise or knowledge or competency to that specific unit of competency. So the fact that you have a higher order qualification, it doesn't automatically mean that you have the competency for the lower level qualification.
We agreed. That's good.
Perfect.
Thank you for that, and we'll put up a clarifying answer on the website about that one as well. The other matters are quite technical, so please bear with us for a second as we have a look through. Dorothy's going to take one from Elaine, and Elaine is a principal trainer at an RTO, and she has asked a technical question, so we just want to make sure we get it right. Elaine asks, does it mean that only a registered nurse can train in CHC CS 305A, or can it be class training by an enrolled nurse?
So the units of competency, and I think
it's a medication unit.
Is that the medication unit?
I think it's the medication
So
unit.
the new medication, first of all, the units of competency are silent on training. So how you deliver the training is entirely up to you. We are only focused on the assessment. And in the medication units, the assessment requires that the assessment must be conducted by a registered nurse. So that's about the assessment. The training, again, it's up to you how you train, but really the assessment must be done by a registered nurse.
And if I could add to that from what you said before, the assessment must be done in a workplace.
And must be done in a workplace.
Cannot be done in a classroom or in a simulated environment.
That's correct. But the question is specifically about training.
Training, yeah.
Look, I think that's all the new questions that we've got in that aren't too technical for us to take on board this morning. I'm letting Dorothy have a look in case she's okay with some of the questions that are there. So please bear with us. This is our second website today, so we're just getting used to the technology. So while Dorothy's having a quick look to see if we can take any more questions, I'll just give you a bit of a sense of where you can get this further information. Obviously, there is a resources link on the webinar window, and you can access any documents that we've referred to today there. Obviously, there's lots of information available via ASQA. You can visit our website, which is all lowercase, excuse me, asqa.gov.au. You can call us through the info line on 1300 701 801. That's 1300 701 801. You can send us an email at inquiries@asqa.gov.au.
A couple more that I can answer.
And, or you can subscribe to the ASQA update. So Dorothy's identified a couple more that she's happy to answer, so I'm going to let her take the question on and give us the answer.
Okay, it's Lois again. She asks a question on the Diploma of Community Services. It says the training package talks of 100 hours of work placement, but while doing industry consultation, some organisations like DHS, which is the Department of Human Services in Victoria, ask for about 400 hours of placement. How do we reconcile such a big difference in work placement? We had a similar concern. Victoria is the only jurisdiction that requires 400 hours. In our national consultations, the other jurisdictions did not require more than 100 hours. So we had to find a number that was nationally acceptable. Hence, the Diploma of Community Services now has 100 hours. But to meet the requirements of DHS in Victoria, your students will need to meet or need to be provided with 400 hours of work placement.
Okay. Thanks, Dorothy.
Do you want me to do the next one?
We'll do one more and then we'll wrap it up, I
Okay.
think. So if you can take one more, that'd be great.
So this is from Ruth at Verto in relation to HLT HPS 006, states for assessment conditions. Assessors must be a RN or registered enrolled nurse, ASQA health practitioner. My question is, all enrolled nurses are registered. Should this not read endorsed enrolled nurses? We consulted with the nursing fraternity, for want of a, what's the equivalent of fraternity? Sister.
Just a sorority.
Sorority.
It could be made. Fraternity will cover it.
And the advice to us was that it should be registered enrolled nurse. So really, it means that they need to be registered with the NMBA.
Okay. Thank you, Dorothy. Thanks for fielding those quite technical questions. I'm sure the people who had that specific level of inquiry were pleased to be able to have those answered. Well, that really wraps us up for today, and so I wanted to take the opportunity to thank the panel, Dorothy Rao from the Industry Skills Council, thanks so much, and Susan Jackson, our very experienced auditor, who's come in off retirement to come and deliver today, so we thank Susan for that. I'd like to thank all the participants who've been out there, who've listened to us and who've been patient as we wind our way through our second webinar, and who've taken the opportunity to ask those questions, because obviously that's what we really want to do today, is give the information and support that's of relevance to you to help your RTO meet the requirements of the standards and the training packages. As I said before, there's resources available on the webinar link. There's plenty of ways to contact ASQA. I went through those. You can visit our website, you can call the info line, you can send us an email, or you can subscribe to the ASQA update to get real-time information about what's happening. So again, thank you for your participation. Thank you to the panel members, and goodbye for this morning.